There is a moment that does not belong to time. It does not arrive with the sunrise, nor is it announced with the ringing of morning bells. It simply imposes itself, abrupt, inevitable, like the first breath after a long drowning. In that instant, everything that seemed solid begins to dissolve, and reality reveals a contour never before seen. What we call life reveals itself as a fragile tapestry, woven by deceptive perceptions and inherited desires. It is awakening, not the trivial gesture of opening one's eyes, but the vertigo of realizing what one's eyes have never truly seen. Carl Jung said that awakening is not an achievement, but a wound, and that's exactly what you feel when your consciousness ruptures from within. A luminous wound that doesn't bleed but expands. Suddenly, the familiar becomes strange. The sound of your own voice, the weight of your hands, the echo of a thought, everything vibrates with a hidden meaning, as if the world were breathing beneath a translucent veil. And yet, trying to talk about it would be like trying to sculpt the wind. It is at this point that the paradox manifests itself. The natural impulse is to share what you've seen, to touch others with the flame that burned within. But one soon realizes that language is a prison. Words, so useful in everyday life, become treacherous in the face of the invisible. There is no way to translate the unspeakable. What is revealed cannot be grasped by concepts. It's like trying to pour the ocean into a cup. The vessel shatters, and the sea remains whole, untouched. Some call this silence isolation, but it's not solitude. It's a form of communion that requires no witnesses. Silence, when born of awakened consciousness, is the purest temple. Jung understood this mystery. He knew that the unconscious cannot be explained, only heard. And when we listen to it, it speaks in symbols, in images, in premonitions. Trying to translate this into rational explanations is to lose the flower's scent by trying to capture it in words. Still, the human heart is stubborn. It yearns to communicate, to offer others what it has seen in the inner clearing. And it is in this yearning that conflict arises. How to share the invisible without corrupting it. How to speak the unspeakable without making it banal. This is where many stumble. In trying to describe awakening, they create idols, doctrines, discourses, and the sacred becomes spectacle. What was pure becomes a product. The inner flame becomes dogma, and the silence that should protect the mystery is replaced by noise. But true awakening needs no audience. It is discreet, subterranean, like a seed that breaks through the earth without fanfare. There is no glory in it, only lucidity. And this lucidity is almost unbearable at first, because it reveals the abyss between who we are and who we pretended to be. It is a nakedness of the soul, a dissolution of the ego that begs for meaning. And when the ego finds no ground, it tries to rebuild itself with what remains: words, explanations, certainties. But none of this survives the gaze of reality. Jung saw this collapse as the highest form of initiation. He said that the unconscious doesn't destroy, it transforms. But to transform, it must first dissolve what is hardened. Thus, when awakening arrives, it disorganizes, disorients, and disarms. It's as if the entire world collapses to reveal something that has always been there, pulsing behind the noise. What is discovered is not new. It is the ever-present, now seen without the distortions of the mind. And then, silence arises. A silence that is not an absence of sound, but a fullness of presence. It is the moment when everything seems to breathe together. The air, the stone, the flesh, the thought. The entire universe pulses in unison, and the boundary between self and other disappears. But the question soon arises: what to do with this? How to continue living when the veil has already fallen? This is where the real challenge begins, that of staying awake amidst the collective dream. It's easy to wake up for a moment. It's difficult not to fall back asleep. The entire society conspires against sleep. Opinions, routines, distractions, obligations, everything invites us to forget what we've seen. But those who have glimpsed reality can no longer pretend they don't know. A return to unconsciousness is impossible. The wound doesn't heal, and from it emanates a silent light that alters everything around it. Awakening, therefore, is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a journey. And this journey requires courage, for it involves walking between worlds, the visible and the invisible, the personal and the archetypal, the self and the whole. Jung knew this when he said that the truly awakened individual is always, in some way, a stranger in their own land. They inhabit the interval between the human and the divine, between what has been and what is yet to be born. But what lies within this space? What happens when consciousness awakens and realizes that nothing is as it seemed? This is something few dare to discover, for to do so requires enduring the silence until it begins to speak. And it is precisely there, at the moment when silence begins to reveal its voice, that the second part of this journey opens. There's something almost tragic in the impulse to teach what can only be discovered. After the first glimpse of reality, human beings feel a burning need to lead others to that same light. It's a gesture of love, yes, but also of illusion. The desire to transmit experience is, in itself, the subtle resistance of the ego, still trying to prove that awakening belongs to it. Carl Jung understood this trap. He saw that the closer a person gets to the center of themselves, the more they try to project their discovery onto the world, as if fearing losing their own form within the infinite. This is where many stumble. They try to teach the path they have taken, believing that the method is the key, when in fact the method was merely the mold of their own need. Error arises from good intentions. The awakened heart desires to share the map, but ignores that the terrain changes with each gaze. What served one may disorient another. What healed one spirit may sicken another. And so, between the purity of intention and the limits of language, the sacred becomes distorted. There's a story that repeats itself in 1,000 guises. A man spends years searching for silence. Tired of the world's noise, he retreats to a small room, where he spends his days observing his own breathing. Gradually, something dissolves. Time seems suspended. His mind opens and he feels a serenity he's never known. When he returns to human society, his first reaction is to teach the secret. Breathe, he says. Do as I did. But he soon realizes his mistake. Those who hear him try to copy the gesture, but nothing happens. Some are frustrated, others admire him, and he wonders why what was once so simple has become so difficult to convey. It's then that he understands. The silence that freed him wasn't in the technique, but in the moment he stopped waiting for results. This is the profound irony of the soul. When it tries to master the mystery, it hides. When it surrenders, it reveals itself. Jung called this movement the creative paradox, the point at which the ego, by letting go of control, allows the unconscious to reveal the path that cannot be planned. It is in this surrender that awakening blossoms, not through effort, but through the cessation of effort. And yet, how can we explain this to someone who is still searching, who still believes there is a method, a master, a secret to be deciphered? In everyday life, this paradox appears in subtle forms. A woman tries to force her own joy by reading self-help books, repeating mantras in front of the mirror, feigning faith to convince her heart. A man clings to meditation routines like someone collecting invisible medals, proud of his own discipline, but unaware that he seeks to transform silence into achievement. Both remain sincere, but exhausted, because the awakening they pursue lies in the very act of ceasing to pursue it. What distances them from the truth is precisely the desire to attain it. Jung once wrote that, "The human soul becomes clear when it ceases to try to be clear." This simple statement conveys the essence of all authentic spiritual practice. It is not the doing that liberates, but the perceiving. The modern world, however, venerates effort. Everything must have a method, a manual, a test. We want to control even the invisible, measure the unspeakable, tame the spirit. And it is in this endeavor that the mystery withdraws, silent, like a wounded animal hiding from the light. There's a kind of blindness in those who try to illuminate others with their own flame. The intention is noble, but the gesture is premature. Every human being has their own night, and it is within it that the fire is lit. No borrowed light can replace the brightness born from personal shadow. This is why the truly wise rarely teach with words. They live what they've discovered, and their presence, more than their words, transforms those around them. The serene gaze, the compassionate gesture, the silent way of being, all this teaches without teaching. Jung believed that the true pedagogy of the soul is symbolic. The teacher is the mirror, not the conductor. He points, but does not lead. He shows, but does not explain. And if the disciple tries to imitate the gesture without understanding the symbol, he loses himself in empty repetitions. Therefore, Every attempt to reproduce the awakening of another ends in frustration. What awakens in one is what needs to be awakened in him, and nothing more. Yet there is something profoundly human in this repetition. It's beautiful even, to see the soul trying to teach the ineffable, stumbling over words, wanting the other to see what it has seen. This tenderness of the spirit is also its trap. Genuine love wants to share, but true awakening is solitary, not because it isolates, but because it dissolves the boundaries of the self that shares. Imagine a man walking along the seashore at dusk. The sky is ablaze with nameless colors, and he feels that somehow the sea itself is watching him. Suddenly he realizes that it is not he who gazes at the horizon, but the horizon that gazes at him through his eyes. It is an unexplainable moment. If he tries to recount it, words break the spell. If he tries to repeat it, the sea remains silent. So he simply smiles and keeps walking, knowing that the mystery is revealed not to those who demand it, but to those who welcome it. This is what awakening is like, an event that cannot be taught, only experienced. And perhaps that is why Jung said that the true master is the one who, in silence, returns the disciple to himself. But there's something even more subtle, something that manifests when we begin to see others with new eyes, a glimmer that pierces through masks and exposes the hidden truths in the people around us. This is where awakening becomes dangerous, because seeing too much can be as confusing as seeing nothing at all. And it is precisely at this threshold, when vision broadens and the heart hesitates between understanding and judging, that the third part of this journey begins. When awareness expands, vision becomes sharp. Suddenly, other people's masks no longer deceive. The falsely cordial gestures, the calculated phrases, the small daily manipulations, everything becomes as transparent as thin glass. You notice when someone speaks out of fear, when they seek approval, when they mold their presence to fit the gaze of others. The clarity is so intense it hurts. And it is at this moment that the most subtle temptation of all arises, the desire to reveal to others what you now see. But awakening doesn't grant authority. It only expands compassion. The error lies in confusing vision with power. Seeing doesn't mean correcting. It means understanding the suffering hidden behind deception. Carl Jung warned that nothing is more dangerous than the truth told to those who cannot yet bear it. And indeed, the desire to show another who one is can be as violent as ripping the cocoon from a butterfly about to hatch. There are processes that only flourish under the weight of one's own silence. Have you ever felt the almost physical urge to warn someone who's headed down a path of error? Have you ever held back a word burning on your tongue, knowing it would be pointless to say it? This is the test of the awakened eye, bearing the weight of perception without turning it into an imposition. True wisdom is patient, and its strength lies in allowing time to fulfill the role that haste destroys. There was a time when I believed that helping was synonymous with intervening, that love should manifest itself in advice, warnings, and corrections. But the more I saw, the less I could speak, because I realized that conscience doesn't awaken under pressure. It blossoms like a bud that opens only when you feel the exact temperature of the light. Forcing this blossoming is condemning the flower to death. The same happens with the soul. Every premature revelation is a wound. Then arises the question that changes everything. To what extent is silence omission? And to what extent is speech violence? The line between the two is tenuous and vivid. There are times when silence is wisdom. At others, it is cowardice disguised as prudence. The challenge is to discern which voice is speaking within us, the fear of rejection or the serenity of those who trust in life's timing. Jung said that the unconscious has its own rhythm, and that trying to hasten it is to disrupt the gestation of the symbol. I remember a friend who spent years lamenting not being recognized for his work. He felt wronged, betrayed, invisible. I clearly saw what he didn't, the arrogance hidden beneath the complaint, the contempt disguised as hurt. I wanted to tell him the truth many times, but each attempt died before reaching his lips. So I just listened. I let him speak, let him exhaust the cycle of his pain. Months later, he himself came to the conclusion, maybe I was difficult to deal with. The revelation came without me needing to sow it. It was his own, authentic, mature. This episode taught me something precious. Lucidity is not contagious. It is germinal. It is not transmitted. It awakens from within, like an echo responding to an ancient call. Therefore, the awakened gaze should not be a blade, but a mirror. What we see in others should not be a denunciation, but rather recognition. Every error we perceive in another has its roots within us. And when we understand this, judgment dissolves into silent compassion. But there is an even more subtle danger lurking, an abyss that opens after vision becomes complete. It is the moment when the awakened one begins to see that nothing, absolutely nothing, is solid. Forms, certainties, identities, everything begins to shimmer like smoke on water. What once seemed real appears to be transitory, an incessant flux with no fixed point. And then comes the height of astonishment, realizing that even the observing I is part of this flux. Have you ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet as nothing around you truly collapses? This is the experience of emptiness, an emptiness that is not absence, but impersonal fullness. There is no center, no edge, no someone who can cling to something. Everything is movement, dance, cosmic breathing. The very thought that tries to understand is dissolved in the very river that generates it, and yet something remains, a silent presence that observes without being observed. This is perhaps the most dangerous of revelations, because the ego, when it touches it, feels threatened. It tries to transform the void into a concept, the abyss into theory, but the void cannot be explained without losing itself. Speaking of it is like trying to measure the wind with a ruler. Jung understood this paradox profoundly. He saw the unconscious as this invisible field from which everything is born and to which everything returns. To touch it is to touch what sustains all forms, including our own. And what do we do when the void stares back? When we realize that our own identity is merely foam on the surface of a nameless ocean? The first reaction is fear. Our instinct is to run, cling to our memories, rebuild walls. But if we resist the escape, something happens. Fear transforms into reverence. The abyss, once threatening, becomes a mirror that returns the unadorned reality. And in this reflection, the self disappears, but life continues more alive than ever. Awakened consciousness then understands that emptiness is not the end, it is the cradle. Everything emerges from it and returns to it. Matter is its mask, time is its disguise. And he who dares to stand before this absolute nothingness discovers, with astonishment, that it is in this nothingness that the totality of being resides. But this revelation cannot be delivered without risk. Those who hear it too soon may lose their footing, interpreting infinity as despair. That is why the truly wise remain silent, not out of secrecy but out of love, because they know there are truths that only a mature soul can bear. And it is when this silence sets in, dense, luminous, and irreversible, that the path forks. Move forward, accepting emptiness as the origin, or turn back, trying to rebuild the illusion of self. It is at this point of choice that the fourth part of this journey begins. When consciousness realizes that the self is not a fixed entity, but a continuous flow of events, something changes irreversibly. Fear begins to dissolve, and with it, everything that was solid becomes liquid, dancing, unstable. Life, previously perceived as a set of events organized by a central subject, reveals itself as a river without banks, a movement that moves by itself. Carl Jung said that the unconscious is precisely this river, a living current that runs through us and that deep down does not belong to us. When the ego tries to contain it, it creates the illusion of stability, but the river cannot be dammed without generating tension. When it breaks the dam, we call it a spiritual crisis, but it is simply the soul returning to its natural course. A man once told me about a dream that haunted him for years. He dreamed he was walking down a deserted street and suddenly saw his own shadow move before his body. The shadow walked ahead, independent, as if with a will of its own. At first he thought it was a nightmare, but over time, he realized the shadow wasn't threatening him. It was guiding him. Jung would call this image an eruption of the self, the hidden center that watches over the ego. The man woke in the middle of the night sweating, but with a new serenity, as if he had understood something inexpressible. Days later, he quit his job, sold his house, and moved to the countryside. He simply said that the shadow arrived first. And how many times have you felt that a part of you was walking ahead, deciding before your mind, that something silently already knew what to do while you were still hesitating? Awakening is this recognition, realizing that life acts through us, not because of us. The I is the echo, not the source. Yet for those who still live identified with their character, this realization is terrifying. The idea that there is no fixed center, that the I is just a habit of the mind, sounds like an annihilation, and without preparation, this kind of truth can destroy rather than liberate. I remember a dinner where I made this mistake. A colleague was talking enthusiastically about his plans, his goals, the better version of himself he aspired to become. I, overcome with reckless sincerity, said, "But this you want to change doesn't exist. It's just a form the universe is taking right now." He looked at me, first confused, then irritated. "Are you saying I'm not real?" he asked. I tried to explain that he was real, but not in the sense I imagined, that he was the cosmos itself experiencing itself through a temporary vantage point. But the words came out as riddles. He rose from the table with the same expression as someone who had just heard blasphemy. Why do we react with such fear when our identity is questioned? Perhaps because we've spent our entire lives building walls to protect a home that never existed. And suddenly, someone tells us there are no walls, no ceiling, no floor. Freedom can be frightening for those still clinging to bars. This is why the great spiritual masters, and Jung was among them, always warned, certain truths need to be offered in small doses. The soul must be strengthened before being stripped bare. Truth, when it arrives too soon, is like a blinding light. Think of a butterfly forced to emerge from its cocoon prematurely. The effort it would make to break the membrane is what strengthens its wings. If someone opens the cocoon out of compassion, they condemn flight. Human consciousness goes through the same process. Suffering, frustration, loss, all of this is the necessary friction that gives density to the soul. Emptiness cannot be revealed to those who still need to believe in forms. There is a precise time for each collapse. But awakening not only perceives the flow of existence, it also questions the invisible foundations of morality and social order. When human beings understand that all rules are symbolic constructions, collective agreements to maintain coexistence, a new kind of freedom emerges. It is the freedom to consciously choose whether or not to participate in these games. The awakened individual sees that codes of conduct, prohibitions, and virtues are not absolute truths, but narratives that help maintain the group's balance. They can follow them or not, but they know that reality does not depend on them. However, proclaiming this freedom to the world is dangerous. Those still asleep in their certainties will hear it as heresy. Saying, "There is no good or evil," sounds like a threat to order. People imagine that without rules, everything would be chaos, but they forget that true ethics arises from unity, not fear. The awakened have no need for commandments, because they understand that hurting others is hurting themselves. When the veil of separation falls, the impulse to cause harm naturally disappears. Morality ceases to be an imposition and becomes a spontaneous expression of love. What about you? Have you ever noticed how certain rules we follow don't protect us, they just domesticate us? That much of what we call virtue is actually disguised fear. Jung said that civilized man is moral out of convenience, not conscience. Only when the unconscious is integrated, when the being recognizes its shadow and includes it within itself, does true morality emerge. One that doesn't depend on approval, but on lucidity. There are curious accounts of people who, after a profound inner experience, completely lost interest in lying, manipulating, or competing, not because they became good, but because the illusion of gain disappeared. One woman said that, after a silent retreat, she tried to deceive a colleague out of habit and felt her entire body stiffen, as if she were about to become ill. He said he understood, in that moment, that lying was a form of violence against one's own blood. She didn't follow rules, she just felt it. Real freedom, therefore, is not the power to do everything, but the state in which no action is separate from the whole. The awakened realize that the universe acts through them, and therefore cannot betray themselves without betraying the cosmos itself. This realization dissolves guilt and arrogance at the same time. What remains is a silent obedience to the flow, a surrender that is not submission, but communion. However, this communion is incomprehensible to those who still live in search of control. The world fears the free because the free cannot be manipulated. And when someone lives without fear, the system that feeds on fear begins to crumble. Therefore, the awakened learn to move discreetly, like someone keeping a spark in their pocket. They don't impose their freedom, they simply live it, and without realizing it, transform the space around them. But there's something even deeper waiting. Something that begins to stir when this freedom sets in. a state in which even the idea of individual consciousness begins to unravel, revealing a dimension in which the universe itself seems to become aware of itself. Awakening reaches the point where the observer and the observed disappear together, and all that remains is seeing. It is in this unnameable territory, where consciousness recognizes itself as totality, that the fifth part of this journey begins. When the awakened being realizes that hurting others is hurting themselves, the idea of kindness ceases to be a virtue and becomes a natural reflection of lucidity. There is no calculation, no effort, no obedience to rules. There is only coherence with the whole. Compassion becomes as inevitable as a heartbeat. Carl Jung said that the truly transformed individual acts according to the soul, not custom. And this is what defines the point at which morality ceases to be a prison and becomes harmony. Genuine awakening does not create saints or heroes. It creates whole people, aware that all life is the same life in different forms. One morning, a man told me he had argued with his wife and, in the heat of his anger, felt something unexpected. As he screamed, he saw his own despair reflected in her face. The expression of pain he provoked was identical to the one consuming him inside. He stopped, unable to continue. He said that for the first time he realized that insulting another was insulting his own soul, not because it was wrong, but because it was incoherent, like trying to hurt your own hand with the other. It was in that moment, in the midst of an ordinary argument, that he understood what Jung called the unity of opposites, the realization that the other is not outside, but within, participating in the same invisible center that sustains everything. This understanding changes everything. Relationships cease to be arenas of dispute and become mirrors of consciousness. Anger loses its function, revenge loses its meaning, and forgiveness dissolves because there is no longer anything to forgive. But this state of clarity is dangerous for those who still believe in duality. In the eyes of the world, those who live without the need for rules appear unpredictable. Those who act out of pure love appear rebellious. Those free from fear appear crazy. And it is precisely at this point that tension grows, when the awakened must learn to live between two worlds, that of flux and that of forms, that of spirit and that of convention. He continues paying bills, keeping to schedules, respecting limits, not out of submission but out of wisdom. He knows that every system has its gears, and that breaking them prematurely is like destroying the bridge before crossing it. The awakened being participates in the social game, knowing it is a game. He pretends to be a character without ever forgetting that he is also the stage. And paradoxically, it is in this conscious pretense that freedom becomes complete. He laughs when necessary, remains silent when convenient, and acts with precision, without identifying with the role he plays. But there are times when the balance is broken. The world seems intolerant of the serenity of those who see too much. Clarity breeds distrust. A woman once recounted how, after a profound spiritual retreat, she began to act with complete spontaneity. She spoke her feelings, cried when necessary, and smiled without reason. Her co-workers began to avoid her, thinking she was losing her mind. Her boss suggested she seek psychological help. What she was experiencing was freedom, but to the group's eyes, it seemed unstable. The clash between the awakened and the asleep is inevitable, because the latter fears the lack of control that the former represents. And you? What would you do if you realized your entire life was just a story told by a character who doesn't exist? Would you continue playing the role consciously, or would you abandon the stage in despair? This is the crossroads of awakening. Either you embrace the lightness of being a river, or you try to harden and return to being stone. Most choose to go back to sleep, because it's safer to inhabit a familiar dream than to traverse the mystery without guarantees. Few remain awake, and those few carry an invisible burden, the knowledge that the world they love is also an illusion. Jung said that bearing consciousness is the most difficult task for human beings. There is no going back once the truth sets in. The torn veil cannot be mended. The awakened person lives in paradox. They act within the illusion without believing in it, and yet they continue to love, perhaps more than ever. They love the dream, the people, the time, the pain, knowing that everything is ephemeral. This mature love is the ultimate form of wisdom. It seeks to save no one, only to illuminate through its presence. Maximum tension arises when the awakened person realizes that not even freedom is theirs. Freedom belongs to the very flow that moves them. They don't choose to love. They don't choose to be good. They don't choose to speak or to be silent. Everything happens through them, and the I that observed dissolves into action. Destiny ceases to be a line and becomes breath. Control disappears, but chaos doesn't arrive. The natural order of things arrives, the one that always existed when the ego stopped interfering. And it is then, at this point of no return, that silence returns as a chorus. Everything learned falls apart. Words lose weight. Life becomes transparent. Awakening reaches its final curve, where the soul no longer seeks to understand, only to be. What began as a search ends as acceptance. But something is still missing. There is an instant beyond dissolution, something that not even silence can explain. A point at which consciousness ceases to be mine and becomes pure consciousness, ownerless, without boundaries. It is to this final mystery that the sixth and final part of this journey will lead us. The moment comes when all the words have been spoken, and what remains is the simple act of consciously existing. Everything we seek, meaning, love, truth, has always been here, hidden in the now. The mind runs in circles trying to find the path, but the awakened heart realizes that the path is the journey itself. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation is not an escape from the world, but an integration. The awakened spirit does not withdraw from life. It immerses itself in it with total presence. And it is this presence, silent and luminous, that transforms the everyday into revelation. There's no need to abandon anything, nor become someone different. One gesture is enough, to observe sincerely. Observe fear, haste, anger, need, not to judge them, but to understand them. When the light of attention touches the unconscious, the shadow begins to dissolve. This is the practice, being awake in the moment you live, breathing and realizing that breathing is already meditation, looking at someone and truly seeing, walking, feeling the ground, eating, noticing the flavor, loving without expectations. Every small act becomes a mirror of the whole. Have you ever noticed that transformation begins when we stop trying to transform ourselves? When we stop pursuing an ideal and simply allow life to pass through us like wind through leaves? Awakening is not a distant event. It is a recognition. It is realizing that we have never been separated from what we sought. Consciousness is the home that has always sheltered us, even when we felt lost. What changes is our perspective. Awakened presence manifests itself in the simplest actions, in patience with those who make mistakes, in genuine listening, in kindness that goes without saying. The world doesn't need more speeches. It needs whole human beings. Words teach, but examples transform. When you live in coherence with what you know, the world around you reorganizes itself. External chaos calms, not because reality changes, but because you begin to see clearly. And if at this moment something within you recognizes what you've read, know that awakening has already begun. It's not a distant destination. It's a silent seed germinating within your very being. Tend to it attentively. Nourish it with silence, with honesty, with compassion. With each conscious gesture, the veil of separation becomes thinner, until one day, effortlessly, you realize that what you called self is merely the form the infinite chose to experience itself for a brief instant. Jung understood that the true miracle is not ascending, but incarnating. It is bringing light into the flesh, until the sacred and the human cease to be opposites. When this happens, the whole world seems to breathe with you. Awakening, then, is not an escape from reality. It is the most profound return to it. It is living without defending oneself from life. Now the call is simple and direct. Practice what you felt. Observe. Breathe. Be silent for a few minutes before bed. Listen to yourself with the same attention you give to others. And when you can, share this experience. Not as a lesson, but as a presence. Because the world awakens not when we talk about consciousness, but when we live with consciousness. If this video touched you, even if silently, speak up. Leave a comment, even if it's just a symbol, a space, a period. Write as if you were turning on a small light in the darkness. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and continue this journey with us. There's still so much to be discovered, and it all starts within you now.